Welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, brought to you by Audible.com. That's right, go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report and get yourself a nice free audio copy of an audio book. Tonight we are live on CJMarsRadio.com, 365 Live, HazyRadio.com. Starting tomorrow night, we're going to be debuting on Para X Radio, Saturday night, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we're going to be rebroadcast throughout the week as usual on awakeradio.us, awakeradio.uk, 1800 Radio, Shazaz Radio, Shake and Wake on Thursday nights, Wednesday nights, firehorseradio.com. Oh, by the way, too, Friday nights we're podcast on WTRU Radio. And on Saturdays, as usual, in the morning, we're on Penny Entertainment on blogtalkradio.com. Okay, tonight we got a really cool guest. His name is Thomas Metzger, and he's written a whole bunch of books. He was referred to us by good old Roscoe, Gary Roscoe, who does all our graphics and stuff like that for our logos and things like that. He's a really cool guy, big friend of the show. Thomas Metzger wrote Undercover Mormon, A Spy in the House of the Gods, Blood and Bolts, Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Car. He wrote The Birth of Heroin and The Demonization of the Dope Fiend. Now, you can find links to all those books on my blog, The Opperman Report. We'll be getting good old Tom in a minute. Now, last week we had Daniel Sheehan, a civil rights attorney, okay? Look up that interview, okay? That was a solid gold interview with Daniel Sheehan. The guy worked for Jimmy Carter. He was a civil rights litigator. Argued in front of the Supreme Court, I think, like 20 times in his life. Worked on the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, the Iran-Contra, the Silkwood case. Fascinating guy, and we're going to get him back soon because we've been talking to him off the air, so we're going to get him back very, very soon. Next week, we got a very important show coming up. We have the Reverend Edward Pinkney, okay? And what the deal is with him, he's an activist, a social activist, and a politician running for office. He's in this town where it's a company town where they're putting the screws to him, and they're trying to give him 20 years behind bars. He has a trial coming up October 27th. Okay, and they're trying to railroad this guy and give him 20 years behind bars for voter fraud, believe it or not. Okay, so we're going to have him on before his trial starts. We need to gather together and support him. We also got a guy from Film the Police, Minneapolis. He's going to be coming on the second half of that show. Coming up, we got Karen McDonald, Jeffrey McDonald's wife. We're going to be doing a whole story about the Jeffrey McDonald case. We got this guy named we got a guest coming on. We're going to be doing a show about the Russian 9/11, about the bombings of these buildings in September 1999 in Russia. That got Putin was able to get elected by blaming it on the Chechens. Pretty serious deal there. So, by the way, you never hear this story in the United States. We're going to have him on our show coming up. After our guest tonight, I'm going to be doing an after show. If our guest wants to stay, he's welcome to stay. If he gets tired, he wants to go home, that's fine. Okay, but I'm going to be reading a little announcement on what's been going on behind the scenes with the troubles we had and why we had to drop freedomslips.com and why we're moving forward and with a certain kind of a quality broadcast that we were unable to provide for you under those conditions. And that's all I'm going to say about that right now. But tonight we got Thomas Metzger. Hey, Tom, are you there?
I am here. Hello.
Let me ask you a quick question, because there's another Thomas Metzger that's like a Klan guy, right?
There is indeed.
What do you do about that?
Well, yeah, I've been writing and publishing for 20-some years, and it's on occasion people get confused about which one is me. He ran for office from California, I believe.
Right.
And he had some affiliations with the Klan. I'd just like to make it really clear to your listeners that Metzger is a very common name, and there's a number of us, and there's actually more than one Tom Metzger. There's 3 or 4 who show up. In any case, yeah, he's not me, and I have no connection to him. And as a friend of mine said, at least your mother didn't name you Heinrich Himmler. So if I'm going to have a name, I guess, well, someday I'll have that name all to myself.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like, he's pretty old.
Yeah,
he's pretty old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's kind of fading from public notice, I think.
Okay, tell us about Thomas Metzger, the author of these books about the Mormon Church, infiltrating the Mormon Church, and the heroin book and the Tesla book.
Yeah, the first book I did in this, not a series, but these nonfiction books. I was a fiction writer for years, and 10, 15 years ago, I started moving into investigative journalism, particularly having to do with 19th century stories, electric chair and heroin, but then moving forward into the closer to the present. So, if the first book I did was about the invention of the electric chair, which was largely a upstate New York. I live in Rochester, New York, on Lake Ontario. So largely the story is a upstate New York one, Buffalo, Rochester, Auburn, etc. So I was able to do a lot of the investigation, a lot of the research. I was within easy striking distance to Auburn Prison, which is the place where the original electric chair was first used, is maybe an hour or two from here. So in any case, it was in a way a local story for me. We can talk about maybe some details farther down the line tonight.
Well, before we get into the books, tell us about yourself,
Sure.
man. You're married, you got kids, you work.
I'm a middle-aged white man. In some ways, very unremarkable. I'm a teacher by day, and I'm a writer. I've been writing since I was 18 years old. I decided when I was 18 I'd do 1,000 words a day and so basically I've done that the rest of my life. I'm in my 50s now, so I've been grinding out the words for decades now. So married, no kids. In some ways, very unremarkable. I teach English at a state university in New York College, and so I teach writing and literature, and that's that's what my right hand is doing when my left hand is doing the writing. So in some ways, not that remarkable. And my interests, though, have led me into some places that probably the average teacher has not gone to. So I'm a musician. Most of my friends and many of my leisure activities are often connected to music. I've been in various rock bands over the years and various other types of music. But other than that, what's interesting about me is my work, much more so than my life.
Now, what about this blog? I noticed you got a blog too, but it's
yeah. The blog is mostly about music, and in particularly strange. There's the stories around various songs. The most recent one is John Lennon wrote a song called Number 9 Dream, in which he chants this Abawa Kawa Puse Puse, which, as it turns out, is maybe some kind of African or Caribbean spell. And Lennon claimed this came to him in a dream, and a friend of mine ran into a black African practitioner of African religion, and he said, where did you hear such a thing? And he said, it's a pop song. John Lennon recorded it. I've been interested in that.
What song is that from?
The song is called Number 9 Dream. It came out in 73 or 74. I think it's on the Walls and Bridges album. And it was a big hit. It's kind of this dreamy. It's kind of a beautiful song. But at the end, he chants over and over again this weird phrase, "Al Pawa Kawa Puse Puse." And a friend of mine who's at the time was studying voodoo drumming and was studying various Caribbean religious practices, happened to be walking down the street in New York City and got talking to this guy from Africa. They got talking, and the guy from Africa said, "How would you hear such a thing? That's a secret. That's a power phrase. That's a phrase that's only for the inner group." And he said it was on the radio every day. John Lennon came to in a dream. So, in any case, I've been writing about strange music. My interests, often take me into little areas like that. Music that has strange connections or strange echoes.
But wait, maybe the Voodoo guys heard the Beatles album, and then they started doing it.
Well, it's possible, but it chronologically doesn't line up.
Okay.
I think the African guy got it long before Lennon did, but who knows?
Well, you did the research, so I'm not going to question you.
Yeah. It's just a little. That's just a little piece, just as an example of some of the stuff that's on the blog. So I've been writing. I started working on the electric chair book. Early 90s, I was writing a novel, a science fiction novel in which Tesla and Edison play a role, and I got digging around trying to find some information about the electric chair, and I realized nobody had written the book yet. So I jumped on it and started doing the interviews. I had an interesting long interview with a guard at Auburn who he showed me the remaining 2 or 3 screws, nuts and bolts of the original chair, which got burned up in a riot in the late 20s. So if anyone ever tells you that they've seen the original electric chair, what they've seen is a vaudeville version of that. There were traveling Dr. Electro types who'd go on stage and do a fake electrocution act. So I know of at least two so-called original electric chairs that have been trading hands from collectors, but they're not the originals. They're original vaudeville props.
Hey, do you know anything about the one that Penn and Teller had? I think it was Penn had it in his house there in Vegas.
Well, if he did, he's got one of the fakes.
Okay.
He's got a vaudeville. It's probably from the 20s or the 30s. But it's the guy that I spoke with, and I spent a year and a half digging on the story of the invention of the electric chair. And the guy, when I was talking to him, he said, "Well, wait a second." And he walked back and came back into the room with a crate of tiles. That each of the tiles had been carved with the face of somebody who had died in the original electric chair and been carved by prisoners. So the floor around the chair, supposedly, according to this guy, was decorated with these hand carved images of the people who died in the chair. And he showed me this stack of tiles, and I have no reason to doubt the truthfulness of his statement. So, in any case, I started digging on that story, and that's Tesla is certainly a big part of that. Thomas Edison, of course, also. Do you want to go down that path right now and talk a little bit about that story?
Yeah. I'm very interested. Yeah, let's hear all about Tesla and Edison and the whole deal. Now, what was your impression of Tesla? Because some people worship him like a god.
Yeah, he was brilliant, utterly brilliant, and utterly. By the end of his life, the mental illness had kicked in pretty seriously, but he was still producing amazing work. And the conflict between him and Edison, sort of a perfect example of the true genius versus the hardworking businessman. Tesla intuited and jumped to his conclusions by these amazing intuitive leaps. Edison was extremely hardworking and would test, for instance, with the light bulb, he tested thousands and thousands of filaments until he got the right one. And it was not an act of genius. It was just that he worked 20-hour days for weeks on end. So there's an interesting combination of Tesla being this. Certainly it's hard to argue that he was not a genius. Alternating current as we use it and understand it would not exist without Tesla's breakthroughs. So there was the story is based as often American stories are on large quantities of money, and this would be the Westinghouse group versus the Thomas Edison / General Electric combination, and this is the so-called War of the Currents, AC/DC war. Edison was promoting the direct current, the DC system, and the Westinghouse company, using Tesla technology, was promoting the alternating current system, which ultimately won the war, although by the end of this competition, back and forth competing for public contracts illuminating and wiring various communities. Ultimately, they came to a certain truce after they realized that there was enough money in it for both of them. But for a good 10 years or so, the two companies were fighting back and forth, and Edison was adamant that the DC would be the way to go, and he turned out to be wrong. And the Tesla Westinghouse technologies are largely what we ended up with today. So Tesla was the man who came up with the technology, but Westinghouse is the man who was able to turn it into money, turn it into profit. Westinghouse was a businessman, and he was an inventor, but not the genius that Tesla was. So we have the Great War of the Currents. That's mid 1800s, and the original chair was first used in 1890 in Auburn, New York.
And wait a minute, didn't Edison try and say, well, hey, look how dangerous this current is, it can kill you?
Exactly, yes. Yeah. He literally went from town to town buying up cats and dogs from kids. He'd say, I'll give you a nickel or a dime for a cat and dog, and he would go and electrocute them in front of the mayor or the town council, whatever. Even took an orangutan to the New York State legislature, and I believe it was either before the legislature or the governor of the state of New York electrocuted an orangutan to show that the AC current was the killer current, as he put it. So cooked this orangutan, but because orangutans are very hairy, the contacts didn't work very well, so it caught on fire. And so it was a particularly grotesque demonstration. And even to the point where there's a very famous film, and it's available. It's certainly a YouTubeable video of Edison electrocuting an elephant. It's really quite striking. It's only a few seconds worth of film, but you can see this elephant crumple and being zapped, being electrocuted by the so-called killer current. And so
it's really tragic when you think about it. This guy's what is this guy up to?
Yeah, he was driven. Edison was absolutely driven. He ended up obviously making a fortune. There's a couple of little corners of his life that people are probably not aware of. He spent years working on an iron ore crushing system that he was absolutely sure was going to make him another fortune, and it was an utter failure. And this is at the same time that he was doing some of his more famous developments and technologies. So that one sort of gets written out of the history books because it was a failure. Whereas Tesla became more and more mentally ill. By the end of his life, he'd go to restaurants when he'd come wear white gloves, and he would ask for 10 or 15 napkins and have to rub his plate and his fork over and over and over again until a big pile of soiled napkins. And so he became nuttier and nuttier as his life progressed, but didn't stop him from producing amazing technologies.
Well, now Tesla also, what was the story, because I just heard this recently, that he claimed he was from Venus. Did he think this was in the beginning or the end? What was the story with that?
I am not familiar with the claim from Venus. That one of the titles, there's a title of one of his biographies is called Man Out of Time. I've not heard the extraterrestrial story, but it's possible.
Okay.
It's possible that he claimed that. By the end, he was utterly friendless, other than his pet pigeons. So he really did, he lost it almost completely by the end of his life. And there were some fascinating technologies, or fascinating, at least supposed technologies, that the federal government came in and grabbed the plans for it. At his death, the federal government claimed and walked off with a lot of the documents, supposedly death rays, some of this high-tech, science fiction-y flavored technologies that to this day we don't know, what exactly happened to those. There's a wonderful story, though. He was friends with Mark Twain, and he had a particular device that if you stood on it, it caused a very, very pleasurable sensation. And so Twain was standing on this device, and all this current was running through him. And Tesla kept saying, "Well, you got to get off. You got to get off. You know, only a couple seconds." And Twain stayed on and stayed on. And eventually, Twain jumped off this device and ran, and he said, "Where is it? Where is it?" Meaning, where's the bathroom? The device felt really, really good, but it stimulated the lower part of the digestive system, and so Tesla had to go running from the bathroom. So there's lots of these wacky stories, and some of them, the Venusian connection, who knows?
Now, what about the story that he had a box that he put it in a car, and he was able to drive this car around with no wires? And do you know if that's true?
He was convinced that he could transmit power without wires.
Right.
And he was pretty attached to that for a long time. And there's some validity to that one. The car with the magic box, I'm not familiar with, but who knows? Tesla fans love him, but they also attribute to him nearly supernatural powers.
Right.
There's some famous pictures of him with massive quantities of electrical current, high frequency current, zapping around him, and they're really quite striking. But as it turns out, some of them were multiple exposures. He did it in some ways to self-promotion. He'd go on stage and have massive quantities, massive amounts of electrical power coursing over the surface of his body, because it made a great show, and he was able to promote some of his, trying to get funding, actually. He needed funding to build a lot of these devices, so he was a showman, and the showmanship had a lot more to do with funding than it did with the real scientific validity, real scientific advancement.
Now, what about the story about how he had a belief in natural, like breeding humans, almost like the Nazi theory of a master race and creating a genetically superior race?
Yeah.
And what about that?
He did talk. He talked about humans being, in effect, meat machines, automatons. So his understanding of what it even meant to be a human was pretty strange. So understanding people as so-called meat machines, I'm not sure how much he was interested in eugenics, but he certainly saw people differently than probably most of us see each other. He probably he probably would have been diagnosed with a number of mental illnesses by modern standards, but of course, so would have many of the great geniuses and creative
and the current geniuses as well, probably.
Yes, and some of the current geniuses. Yeah. You're right.
Oh boy. All right. Okay. So, what else can you tell us about the whole origin of the chair and stuff?
Well, the chair. There was a battle about who would get the electric chair first. A little bit like the space race or the race to get the A-bomb. The various states were competing about who would have this new high-tech death machine. So New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, et cetera, states in the upper and in the eastern seaboard. Because Edison had his labs in New Jersey, there was some question: would New Jersey get the chair before the state of New York got it? So the state of New York legislature created what's now called the Death Commission, where they did a world tour of all the possible ways to execute a human being, and they came up with this document, 100-page or so document, describing every single possible way that the human race had executed its undesirables over the years, and then went through one by one, and ultimately it was all kind of a scam. Everybody knew that the electric chair was going to be the next technology, but the state legislature wanted to give it some gloss of legitimacy. So they came up with 4 possibilities. They thought the state of New York could stay with the hanging, which had been the standard here for the century before. They considered the garrote, an iron collar that would go around your neck, and a screw would be turned and a person would be strangled. And they threw that out because it was supposedly it would remind people too much of the Spanish Inquisition. They considered the guillotine very seriously, but they said no, it's too French. We want a technology that's profoundly American. They considered the firing squad, but they said, man, we don't really want American citizens associating firearms with killing criminals. So ultimately, they came up with the all-American technology, brand new, high tech for the time, the electric chair, which was to be a symbol of American ingenuity, American progress, and the state of New York got it first, but the man who ran the chair, Edwin Davis, became a traveling executioner, and he worked for probably 5, 6, maybe 8 or so states, and he had patented electrodes that he carried around in a black bag. He'd get the call or get the telegram in those days, get on a train, go to Pennsylvania or Massachusetts or wherever with his secret electrodes in his bag, and he'd get to the prison, set it up, and do the job. I tracked down the patent. The way I found him was actually a patent search. I knew that he claimed he had these special electrodes, and so I dug through old patent files, which then got me. It was a circuitous route, but I found out where he lived and found out some stuff about him through a patent search, which it's the only time that had ever gotten me that angle had ever gotten me anything useful. But it was quite helpful to track down some of the information on this guy who was the executioner.
Now, how many executions were they doing in a year that there was all this effort going on?
Well, certainly dozens in the state of New York. It went up and down over the decades. There was a chair in Auburn, which is in western New York. There was a chair at Dannemora, which was way up on the Canadian border, up almost to Montreal. The most famous one is in Sing Sing, which is just up the river from New York City. So there was at least 3 electric chairs in just the state of New York. And Pennsylvania had one, New Jersey, Massachusetts, West Virginia, and the assumption was, well, why not just use the same guy, the same executioner, this guy Edwin Davis, and so he got the work. He did this for about 10 years as the traveling executioner, and then retired and ran a cider mill the rest of his life.
Wow.
Yeah, just a rural, kind of a peaceful existence apparently at the end. So there was, and there were dozens going on at the time. The last hanging in the state of New York was one of the reasons they went for the chair is a woman named Roxy Drews murdered her husband, chopped him up, and burned most of him in a stove. But she got caught, and she was convicted, and she was hanged. And it was deemed very unseemly for a woman to be seen hanging from the end of a rope, the so-called scaffold dance.
Right.
So that was one of the reasons the state of New York thought this is a little bit too barbaric now.
Yeah, sit him down, put him in a chair. It's much more civilized, right?
Put him in a chair, and certainly to this day there's still botches with that. But early on, the first guy that got killed in the electric chair, it took him 4 tries to get it right, and by the end he was, as the commission that studied it said, he was cooked like well done beef, flames shooting out of his head. He caught on fire. He was cooked and then caught on fire because they didn't have the tech. Well, they didn't understand all the details yet.
Right.
And also, one of the belts on the generator kept slipping, so the power would go on and the power would go off. So it sounds like a comedy, but it was a pretty amazing, grotesque demonstration of modern tech, at least modern for the time.
Well, how'd you come out of this? Like, are you for the death penalty, against it? What do you think?
I'm not too connected to politics. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to current politics. The angle I came out with in the book was that executions are human sacrifice.
Yeah, right.
That every civilization does human sacrifice, and if the United States or various states in the U.S. are going to do it, why not be honest and say, well, we do human sacrifice just like the so-called primitives in ancient days or whatever. So yeah, the description of once this guy Kemmler, the first man who was killed in the chair, they cut his body up and they did an autopsy, and there was 6 or 8 different doctors vying about who could get which part of his body. There was a group from Buffalo, a group from New York City, basically fighting. It sounds like a Three Stooges episode, but fighting over parts of his body. And they described it in very, very well. It sounded a lot like a meal. All these food metaphors, talking about well done beef, etc. So it was this sort of crazed, grotesque demonstration, and I don't think any more or any less civilized than hanging. My guess is human beings are always going to kill each other, and if you're going to do it, maybe at least be honest and say this is why we're doing it. But I'm not. I don't get involved too much in the ins and outs of political battles about.
Okay, I got you. And this is from the book Blood and Volts: Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. And the way you describe the stuff, that is really fascinating. I would love to read that section about how all these doctors were trying to, like you described, it's fascinating history. Now the crimes that people were getting executed for back in those days, was it only murder or what else?
It was almost always murder, yeah. Kemmler, the guy that got, the first guy that got executed, was he was a drunk brawler, kind of a lowlife, and
well, now you're talking about me. Wait a minute, what?
Well, at least you're keeping your nose clean.
Yeah, I try.
I
don't sit down. That's right.
He was an axe murderer. He went after his girlfriend with a hatchet, and did her so much damage. She stayed alive for a remarkably long time, and the description in the newspapers, crawling around with parts of her brain actually coming out of her broken skull, but still alive. So Kemmler was he was a lowlife. There's no question. But what's curious is that the case went all the way to within 1 or 2 courts of the U.S. Supreme Court. He had the most expensive lawyer in the United States, Burt Cochran, who was also a congressman, and the reason was because Westinghouse paid to have this super high-powered lawyer, one of the best orators in America, represent him all the way to the Supreme Court, because Westinghouse didn't want his technology associated with executions. So here's this low-life guy from Buffalo, New York, ordinary drunken kind of Joe, with the most expensive lawyer in the country, and it was all because Edison and Tesla were, in the middle of this AC/DC war, wanting their techs to become, the next.
Oh, that's
the next
fascinating too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm flicking through. I've got the book in front of me. I was thinking if I could find, we'll keep talking, but if I can find the description of the autopsy, it is pretty striking.
Okay.
But let's keep going.
Yeah, keep flipping. Now, what about how long? Now, because nowadays you got all these appeals after appeals after appeals. Was it like that back then too, or no? They just
it didn't go as long. Well, if it hadn't been. If Kemmler hadn't been the first guy to be slated to be in the chair, he would have been executed within probably a month or 2. But because this was a big case and it kept going through higher and higher courts, it went. I think it went for over a year, moving through the courts, and because there's so much money involved, and of course money and big lawyers are going to slow down any process. So it took a while, but after a while, beyond the Kemmler case, once it was deemed constitutional, the argument was that it was cruel and unusual punishment, and that's how they managed to get it to go to the Supreme Court. And the argument was, well, it's brand new, so I guess it's unusual, and it's cruel, supposedly, because it causes people to catch on fire.
Yeah.
But the courts ultimately decided that what the word unusual meant was not, was it unique or never been done before, but was it in keeping with American standards and practices? So it was about, is this an American technology, and is this keeping with who we are? And the courts ultimately said yes. It may be never used before in history, but it's not unusual because it's so American, and it's got the Edison, the stamp of Edison's genius and Westinghouse's success behind it.
That is just. I think this would be a book that I would enjoy.
Yeah.
Now, I told you we're gonna have a break at 5:30. This is one of those short breaks. I'm gonna read some live ads.
Okay.
We're with Thomas Metzger, not the Nazi Ku Klux Klan guy, but the author of Blood and Bolts: Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. We're talking about this book right now. You can find a link to that book on my blog, the Opperman Report, and you can also find that book directly if you want to go straight to Amazon.com. You can just go there and pick it up tonight while we're talking. Very fascinating. I think I would like this book because it's kind of up my niche. Mm-hmm. Okay. By the way, this week I'm going to be on Jimmy Church, Fade to Midnight. I think it's called Fade to Midnight. Yeah, I'm going to be on Jimmy Church, and that's on the Dark Matters Network, the old Art Bell Network. They have me on there to talk about all my PI stuff and all my crazy stuff that I do. Pacific West Bamboo. Everybody knows Amanda over at Pacific West Bamboo, one of the coolest women alive. 503-839-8126. Her email is demroots@oppermail.com. You spell Demroots, DEMROOTZ, and then it's oppermail.com. And you can find her page on Facebook, Pacific West Bamboo. They're your number one source for timber construction, craft-grade bamboo poles, plants, products. They specialize in eco-friendly reclaimed wood products for the home and garden or crafts. They're located in Portland, Oregon. They're servicing the Northwest for over 10 years. By now, it must be 11 years. We had this copy like a year ago. They can be reached at 503-839-8126. Their Facebook page is Pacific West Bamboo, and they can and do ship nationwide. If you've got any kind of construction project going on or an arts and craft project, whatever you got going on, give Amanda a call because she is a bamboo expert. And they got a new deal going on with the strongest possible bamboo flooring, veneers, and laminate made from Guadawa bamboo. Now, that's the strongest bamboo you can get on Earth. If you looked on that show Gilligan's Island, they used to make the huts out of Guadawa bamboo. It's supplied by Amanda. It's grown and produced and manufactured in Central America using only economically and environmentally friendly practices and standards. You can always support the Opperman Report with a PayPal donation. You want to keep the show going, OppermanReport@gmail.com. We appreciate your donations and help to keep us supported and keep us going there. You can also find a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, on my website, emailrevealer.com. Good old Mike Gray from infinityhomeplans.com. Don't forget Mike Gray. He's your resource for 3D and 2D digital draftsman services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D models, renderings, and more. Any kind of project you got, construction, home building, whatever it is, get a hold of infinityhomeplans.com. Ask for Mike Gray. Tell him I sent you. Okay, Tammy. Essentially Tammy. This is our newest sponsor. Okay, now if you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy. You might be slipping and sliding on your way to her website, but you can find her you may slip and slide on that oil on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils independent distributor. Now, these 100% therapeutic grade oils help support the body's natural functions. Now, you can click on her website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals and check out the benefits of oils such as frankincense, joy, valor, lemon, bees, panaway, and more. You can email Tammy at JOCA Tammy, T-A-M-I, at yahoo.com, or give a call to 352-239-8546. That's 352-239-8546. Hey, New World Mexican Women. Okay, now I love these women. They're down in this southern state of in Mexico called Guerrero. And they're a group of village women in Mexico. They're from a very small town in south of Mexico, and these women have loved ones in the United States living and working as migrants. Now, what they do is these women write love letters to their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, begging them to come back to Mexico. So you can read their letters in handwritten form in Spanish, and then it's translated, typewritten into English, and you can see pictures of the women and their loved ones and stuff like that. It's a beautiful book. It's a coffee table type book. Now, they all beg and plead to convince their husbands and brothers and sons and fathers to return back to Mexico. Okay, they're authentic letters. They speak for themselves. You can read them and judge for yourselves. And what is the situation with these Mexican migrants? Are these men now hoping to become U.S. citizens? That's the question in this book. And also in the second half of this book, where you can get this book on Lulu.com, New World Mexican Women, they teach you how to make authentic Mexican jewelry, okay? So you can learn, and there's even a video on there, too, that teaches you how to do it. So now you can buy the book, you can get the free version, and you can learn, and you can put it on your coffee table. It's a beautiful book. It's definitely, once you start flipping through it, you're going to enjoy it, I guarantee you that. But the thing is, too, is you can learn how to make this jewelry, or you can contact these New World Mexican women. Contact them through me, Opperman Report. I'll put you in touch with them, okay? And they will sell you jewelry wholesale, because they're down there. It's a collective of artists down there. These women, they're men of left town, and they are making this jewelry. This is how this whole town supports themselves. It's from these women. So they support us. We need to support them. And by the way, it was through these women in Mexico that put me in touch with the Reverend Edward Pinkney, who's going to be our guest next week, who is a famous activist who needs our support as well. So as you can see, the Opperman Report, we're a family. The sponsors support us. We support them. They recommend guests. And then we try and help out the guests and keep them out of prison when they're trying to help us with their civil rights struggle. But tonight we got Thomas Metzger, the author of telling us this fascinating story about blood and volts, Edison, Tesla, and the invention of the electric chair. Really good stuff on that, man. But he's written these other books as well about Undercover Mormon, a spy in the House of Gods, and then about the birth of heroin and the demonization of the dope fiend. Okay. Hey, did you find that thing you were looking for, Tom?
I did, yeah. And it's just a brief paragraph. So I'll read this because I'm a better reader than I am talker. So as I write here, this is after his death. So ended Kemmler's earthly existence. Yet to the man who created the electric chair, his value as a symbol, a sacrificial victim, continued. The odd use of food metaphors. McDonald said the flesh was like overdone beef, and another witness stated the muscles were carbonized. I've eaten beef cooked by electricity for 6.5 minutes. Well done, and I looked like this. Indicate that something more than mere propitiation of the ill-defined gods of progress were at work here. Newspapers commented on Kemmler's ox-like submission. The doctors bottled his blood like a holy relic, and at the bizarre group autopsy, 6 learned men gathered around the table with scalpels and saws and forceps, vying for the best parts, like children squabbling for drumsticks and a Thanksgiving turkey. All of this makes Kemmler's death seem uncannily like a totem meal where members of a clan kill and eat the beast that defines them as a social group. Kemmler became, by his death, a receptacle of the electrical numen, awful, abhorred, and venerated at the same time. The men gathered in the dimly lit basement were members of a tightly knit brotherhood, a clan defined by its devotion to progress. By participating in this, they were able to partake of and share among themselves of electricity's so-called godlike power and heavenly might, as the Scientific American described it. So, there you go.
Yeah, incredible, man. You know?
Yes, the more I dug on this story, and actually this is the case for most of the projects that I've worked on that I've really enjoyed. The more I dig on something, the stranger it gets, and then the more I know that I need to be. Well, this is the project for me, and I found some strange elements of the story that were kind of pushed back into the shadows. Since my book, Blood and Volts, came out, other books on the same subject have come out, and it's quite clear that at least one of these writers read my book quite closely.
Yeah.
but you don't own a story. You know, history is not owned by one writer, and so everyone's got certainly has the right to their take on historical narratives.
Yeah, there was that fascinating documentary, too, about the guy who was an expert on executions, and then he became like an expert witness against the Holocaust denier kind of guy.
Yeah, actually I got interviewed for that documentary.
Oh, really?
That's Errol Morris's documentary. It's called Mr. Death.
Right.
And that guy, I quote him early on in my book. Actually, before that documentary was made, before Errol Morris started working on that project, I got some quotes from that person who's he made a living creating execution technologies, and
Right.
he got wound up in this kind of shady question. People were using him to try to question the validity of the Holocaust death chambers, etc. So he got kind of wound into a project that was a bit over his head. His name was Fred Lutscher. And according to Fred Lutscher, the president of the only company in America that designs and builds execution systems, and here's the quote: "Current cooks, so it's important to limit the current. If you overload the individual's body with current more than 6 amps, you'll cook the meat on his body. It's like meat in an overcooked chicken. If you grab the arm, the flesh will fall right off in your hand. Presumably the state will return the remains to the person's family for burial. Returning someone who has been cooked, however, would be in poor taste." End quote from Fred Lutscher. When Errol Morris was working on that documentary, we talked at some length, as he ended up not using the information I had because he was going down a different path. But it was just part of his research that he and I talked for a while. But yeah, another fascinating corner of
Yeah, that's
story.
a fascinating documentary. And I tell you, I guess you have to have a certain kind of a mindset to be in that business, and to be around that kind of thing. I don't think I could do it.
Yeah, I think. It was a dark year and a half, even just researching the book. So it's hard for me to imagine what it'd be like to work in that field.
I could imagine. And before we move on to the other books, is there anything you want to leave us with the Tesla and the electricity?
No, I think I'd be happy to move on to the next.
Okay, now the Mormon book. Okay, now
that's my most recent book.
Okay, now let me ask you this, man, because it says the book is called Undercover Mormon: A Spy in the House of the Gods. Now, and when they're describing the book, it says how you look unusual or something like that, but you really don't.
No.
Yeah.
What I did is I shaved my beard and I got a haircut and I put on a white shirt and a black pair of pants and I changed my name. I faked up a name and I went and became part of the Mormon Church. And so I spent 6 months worming my way into the Mormon Church, and so I wrote the story of my time doing that. And maybe your listeners might not know this, but usually people associate the Mormon Church with Utah, and of course that's because that's their main place these days. But all the holy sites, all the big stuff that all happened here in western New York, in kind of middle of nowhere, a small town called Palmyra, and there's these sacred spots. A thing called the Hill Cumorah, where Joseph Smith, the original or the founder of the Mormons, he found the golden plates supposedly, and there's a sacred grove, et cetera, et cetera. So, in a way, this region is their holy land. So I decided I'd write a book from that angle. That I would be somebody who grew up here. I've spent my whole life in this area. But I'd never crossed over the line into Mormondom, so I thought, that I would do that, and out of that came the book Undercover Mormon.
So now the plan was to go in undercover and explore the Mormon Church, like what they believe, and what's the whole idea? Well,
the idea for me was to immerse myself in it. There's lots of tell-all books about the Mormons. Because they're big, they're powerful, very, very wealthy. Because of that, there's plenty of books where people have dug into the various corners of the story. But I thought because this is the area, this is the Holy Land, I'd have a different kind of story. And every year in July, there's the biggest pageant in the Western Hemisphere takes place. It's called the Hill Cumorah Pageant. 700 people on stage. So picture a small town with a hill outside of the small town with a great big stage built on top. It's sort of like a Disney musical stage, and 700 volunteer actors. They act out the story of the Book of Mormon, all dressed in costume, etc. So it's this strange, over-the-top outpouring of American religiosity. Kind of not in the middle of nowhere, but in a corner of America that most people don't know much about.
So they act out how he found the book and then he lost the book?
Yeah, Yeah, they don't say much about the losing of the book.
Okay.
That part of the story gets kind of underplayed.
Yeah, because how do they do the play the next year if they lost the book?
Yeah, it takes place. Yes, the pageant takes place supposedly right on the spot where the golden plates were discovered.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's a fascinating. It was a good 6 months for me. I walked in the first day, and so here's a single, middle-aged, kind of ordinary-looking guy. And the very first thing they did is they sent two pretty girls to be missionaries. I never once in 6 months spoke to two male missionaries. It was always girls.
Right.
So they would. I'm not the only person that's had this experience that a single man gets the young women, these are women are dressed very modestly, but it's not a coincidence that they do this. And so immediately my guides were these two young women, and I spent the 6 months with them they were trying to get me to convert and trying to get me to be baptized, etc. I ended up speaking from the pulpit. I ended up singing with the choir. I almost got baptized. I eventually got thrown out of the Hill Cumorah pageant by the head of security. We'll talk about that further down the line. So it's a fun adventure, and it was not. The book is not a hatchet job. The Mormons, with this musical that's doing so well, the Book of Mormon, it's making $1 zillion. People want to mock the Mormons, and there's TV shows, Big Love, etc., that's about Mormons. People want to mock them, and that was not my intention. There's enough of that. I wanted to get inside and see what it was like from the inside, rather than just say, what a bunch of, just to make fun of people.
Let me ask you a technical question about going undercover, because now you're married and you have a wife and a home.
I do.
Right. Now, but you went in there pretending you were single. Now, they didn't check up enough on you. They let you speak from the platform, and they let you sing in the choir without checking?
They didn't check a single thing. And I learned a few things. In a way, it's a book about learning to lie.
Right.
I learned some things about lying. And one of them is if you use the vocabulary of whatever group it is you're trying to become part of, if you hit a couple of the right phrases, people think, oh, he's one of us. He's using the same words, the same vocabulary. He must be one of us. And so I did that a few times, and people accepted me. And never once did anyone. Well, can you imagine another church saying, "Well, let me see your ID"? I guess they just figured, well, why would anyone pretend to be something else? So no, nothing was ever questioned. I used the name Anton Mesmer, which I would think that they would have thought that's a bit funny. The word mesmerism comes from that word, and Anton Mesmer was the original. This would have been 18th century. He was the inventor of hypnosis.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Even my name, it was absurd. And I said my name was Anton Mesmer, and they said, okay, fine. They were very accepting, and in some ways, they just wanted one more person to join,
right?
And they were willing to, put up with all my questions, in order to maybe get me to become part of the church.
Now, were you ever concerned that you said, well, maybe I'm falling for this. Maybe this kind of makes sense. I'm going to buy into it. Was that ever a concern?
It not really. No,
okay.
I never once. I made a few rules for myself as part of the game, if you want to call it that. I never once said anything. I never once said that I believed or thought anything they said were true, but I would, like for instance, I was asked, do you want to be baptized? And I didn't say, yes, I believe this is all true, or no, it isn't. I just said, well, I thought really hard about this, and and what came to me was something my grandfather once said, and I pulled out an old hymnal, and I showed him, I said, this was my grandfather's favorite hymn, and it's called Trust and Obey. And then I just pulled that out, and when you pull out an old hymnal and say Grandpa gave it to you, who's going to argue with that? It's the sort of it softens up anybody when you talk about the dear old Gramps. So people didn't ask me any questions about who I was, where I was from, why I was doing this.
It's the little props,
Yeah.
And when I see a guy with an initial ring, and a business card and, a monogram at the cufflinks, you kind of, this guy is really trying to make me fall into, trying to convince me what his name is,
But do you ever do undercover stuff?
You know what? Yeah, I do. Yeah, all different kinds of stuff like that. You get involved in, you question people, you interrogate people. But now mostly it's computer forensics and stuff like that. But I've done undercover stuff, yeah.
I'm just curious about this phenomenon of pretending to be something that you're not.
Right. And you meet a lot of people that are pretending to be something that they're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's a lot more common than people think, yeah.
Yeah, it is indeed. Yeah, my wife said the worst thing was that every day I'd come home from church with a splitting headache because I'd sit in church for 2 hours and I'd want to sort of stand up and scream, "How can you possibly think this is true?" But I'd have to keep my mouth shut. So it was a lot of repression of my impulses. I had to behave and be a good boy, and so that put a little pressure on my brain and triggered some migraines.
Yeah, I could imagine. Did you socialize too with them, like after services and things?
Yeah,
you had to.
Some. Yeah, that's true. And after a while, I started to feel a little bit like a slime ball. Like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, I'm not. Well, I want to find out who these folks are, and I'm not going in as a hatchet job. I quoted everything directly. I always had a notebook with me, and nobody ever said boo because I said, well, I'm a student. I want to learn about this. So so all the quotes are verbatim. I was able to sit with people and just write down exactly what they were saying. And how often does an investigator get to have the notebook right out front, just like, well, just tell me more, and I want to make sure you get the quotes right.
Right.
So they were willing to play, and I was willing to play, and the book is fun more than it is a hatchet job.
Well, give me an
idea.
idea.
It does tell the story.
Is there some good jokes in there? You got some good jokes in there?
Well, it's not ha-ha jokes, but it's more. Their worldview is unusual.
Right.
The god of this planet lives on the planet Kolob, K-O-L-O-B. Their theology states that either God lives on this planet or God lives near this planet. And so it really is a science fiction religion, which was part of the fascination for me. It was, I love science fiction, and I thought, wow, I got science fiction religion right down the street. So we've got God living on another planet, humans who get to become gods of their own planets. I even heard a sermon in which, and I kid you not, the sermon was all based on Darth Vader and Star Wars.
Really?
And the person spoke from the pulpit for a half an hour about Darth Vader and Star Wars. And I thought, wow, this really is science fiction. They're not hiding anything.
But they're such sincere people. Like, didn't it kind of break your heart once in a while?
Well, yeah, they're sincere. They tend to be good-natured.
Yeah.
The federal government loves them. The CIA and various federal agencies are full of Mormons because they're law-abiding. They do what they're told. They don't ask hard questions, and yeah. So it was I didn't. I said goodbye. Eventually, I said this is just not for me, and the final exchange of emails with the young woman who was actually with me the whole 6 months. She was sort of my guide the whole time. She sent this really heartfelt, kind of heartbreaking email saying how she really wanted me to reconsider, and of her whole time here in Western New York as a missionary, I was the one person she learned the most from. And I thought, man, I was being a bit of a slime ball. But
now, how old was she? A lot younger than you?
I'm pushing 60, and she was 20.
Get out of here! Wait a second, you're 60 years old?
I'm 58.
Oh, wow. Hey, I saw your pictures, man. You look like a young guy. I thought you were younger than me.
Well, thank you. I don't. In any case, yeah, I guess I can pass for somebody a bit younger than I am. So,
well, we're coming up to another break. We're going to take a little music break so you can get a drink and stuff like that. But we're here tonight with Thomas Metzger. He was telling us all about his book, Blood and Volts, Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. You can find that book on Amazon.com, or you can go to my blog, The Opperman Report, and you can click right on there and order it. And then he was just telling us about another book he wrote, The Undercover Mormon, A Spy in the House of the Gods. It's more of a humorous type book. It sounds very interesting as well. And when he comes back, I'm gonna ask him about all this stuff about how they kicked him out of this big fair thing he was telling us about. But Cindy, are we ready to go with the little musical break here? Okay, thank you, sweetie.
You are listening to WCJV Digital Broadcasting, Youngstown, New York.
Con soles de primavera para plantar la bandera con la luz de tu sonrisa. Aquí se queda la cara, la entrañable transparencia de tu querida presencia, comandante Che Guevara. Tu amor revolucionario te conduce a nueva empresa, donde esperan la firmeza de tu brazo libertario. Aquí se queda la clara, la entrañable.
Oh boy, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. I tell you, I love that song, man. I just wish I had somebody to dance with. Maybe Tom will dance with me. But this show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report, and you get yourself a free audiobook. Okay, we're here every Friday night, live, CJ Mars Radio, 365 Live, hazyradio.com, and throughout the week on all our other affiliate stations, our little syndication package we got going on. During the week, I'm going to be on Jimmy Church, Tuesday night. You can catch me on Jimmy Church on which is Fade to Midnight, it's called. It's on the Dark Matters Network, the old Art Bell Network run by Keith Rowland. Who knows? Maybe we'll be on there soon, too, right? Maybe they'll be carrying on our shows as well. But tonight we got a fascinating guy, Thomas Metzger. And he was telling us first about his book, Blood and Volts, Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. Fascinating book. I got to get that one there. But now we were just finishing up on the Undercover Mormon, A Spy in the House of the Gods. And I think we were at the port where you were going to tell us about how you got kicked out of that event.
Yeah. So picture the stage with 700 people dressed in ancient costumes that are a mix between ancient Israel and American Indians. And so we have this very elaborate sort of Disney musical stage, 700 people on the stage acting out the story, and over 10,000 people every night. The pageant runs, I think, 10 nights in a row in the summertime. And so night after night, tens of thousands of people, and they literally come from around the world for this event because it's one of the most important religious demonstrations for the church. So we've got this massive audience, massive crowd. And out on the street, sort of maybe a quarter mile behind this gigantic crowd, it's kind of like Woodstock for Mormons, and tents and food and costumes and music. But all along on the road, there's about a dozen different groups of protesters, all screaming into megaphones, all waving signs, and trying to convince the people who are coming to see the show that they shouldn't be coming to see the show, or trying to convince the Mormons that they're wrong. So we have these cranked up, crazy protesters on the road yelling and screaming, and you have to, in some ways, you got to sort of weave your way through the gauntlet of the screaming protesters. So then there's a battle of the bands in a way, because the Mormons have figured out if they can put speakers up and blast out, if they can overwhelm the protesters with music, they can, so we got this music blasting back and forth, people chanting on the street. So a bit of a wild atmosphere.
Yeah, sounds crazy.
Yeah, it is a bit crazy.
Yeah,
the county sheriffs are all out to making sure nobody's beating each other up or getting in trouble. I saw the worst possible worst possible religious T-shirt I've ever seen. It said, "Ask me why you deserve hell." And I thought, who's gonna talk to this guy? So we got this crazy atmosphere, and so I went with a recording device with a friend of mine. And my friend is tall and has long hair and a long beard. He basically looks just like Jesus. So there I am sitting in the audience with a guy who looks just like Jesus with a recording device. And before the show starts, the members of the cast all circulate around, and they talk to the members of the audience, and they're basically promoting their religious their agenda. So they're all circulating around saying how you doing and where are you from. So we got talking to these two young guys from Utah, and we were asking them questions. As soon as I asked him, tell me about the planet Kolob, the planet where God lives, literally within 5 seconds of me saying, tell me about the planet Kolob, the head of security and another guy zoomed in on us and said, "We know what you're doing. We know what you're up to." And I thought, well, I'm just here enjoying the show. I'm just enjoying the wildness here. And they thought that we were protesters who jumped the fence and were trying to worm our way into the crowd and we were trying to bait supposedly these guys. And we weren't. We were just having a fun conversation with two guys dressed in bathrobes and great big ancient caveman hats. It was a strange evening. And so I just said, "All right, it's fine. I'll take the recording device back to my car. Just hands off." And so we did, and they played nice. But as soon as I came back from dropping my recording device in the car. As soon as we came back, there was a gigantic moat of empty chairs all around us, maybe 20, 30 feet all around. The word had gone around, don't talk to these two guys. So we were sitting in the middle of the audience, surrounded by this cordon, this empty space. We were the forbidden ones. So
it's like you parted the Red Sea, you know?
We parted the Red Sea indeed, yes. And that was so that was the first. Well, I've been out there. The pageant's been going on for, I don't know, decades, maybe the 1920s, 30s, somewhere in there. And I went out there as a kid back in the 70s. About a week after I saw David Bowie on one of his glam rock tours. So it was a very strange combination when I was a teenager, get to see the Bowie glam rock extravaganza, and then a week later go out to this hill in the middle of nowhere and watch the Mormons perform pretty much the same glam rock extravaganza. So that was part of the fun, and the Mormon experiment for me was to see how far I could go and still maintain, well, how far I could go in and how much I could find out without actually having to cross over the line and really get baptized.
Right.
And so I did say no to that. Eventually, I said that was not going to happen, and we moved on to the next phase.
Now, how much time were you actually undercover there with these Mormons?
It was the 6-month period.
6 months. Now,
so pretty much every Sunday I'd go, and then I'd also go to other events.
Now, after the book came out, did you hear from them?
I didn't. You know, they're huge. They're powerful, and I'm just, I'm a mosquito. Biting an elephant. I don't think they particularly cared. The book came out. It's selling some copies. People are enjoying it. But because it's not a hatchet job, they probably would say, well, it's just, if they're not going to give a hard time to the Book of Mormon, the Broadway show, which is making millions, they're not going to give me a hard time.
Yeah, but even on a friendly basis, like the local bishop didn't say, hey, you got us, Tom,
Yeah, I did have a nice talk with a bishop, and very near the end of my sojourn among them. No, they never. Well, I don't know if they're listening tonight. Now they're going to know. But the book was published as by T.H. Metzger, so my name is really on it. And so if anybody cared to, they could find me, in the phone book or whatever.
I'll give you a number. Yeah, call me.
Maybe not. Maybe not tonight.
Okay, I won't.
Okay, thank you.
So is there anything else you want to tell us about the Mormon book, or you want to move on to
let's move on to heroin.
Let's do it, my man.
Let's do heroin.
Okay. All right, man. Now, how'd you get into that one?
Well, this one is
because I'm from the Lower East Side. I'm from the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Yes, I was actually wondering. You said you're from Nevada, and I'm listening. I'm trying to place your voice. So I wanted what street? What neighborhood?
I was okay. Oh boy, you want to get into that? I was born in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
We moved to Staten Island.
Okay. So
you can hear all that. And then, but in my teenage years, I hung out Lower East Side, Alphabet City. Bleecker Street, man, Washington Square Park. I was one of the yippies on Bleecker Street in New York City in 1979 to about 82. About 77 to 82.
I know. We might have passed each other on the street when.
It's a small world, man. Ago. It's a small world.
It is. Yeah, interesting people run into other interesting people. So,
that's the truth too.
Yeah, back to the heroin book. It's a little bit more like Blood and Bolts. It's not a funny book, and I'm not an expert in the modern history, the modern phenomena about heroin. This is about the invention of the actual substance, and then the 20, 30, 40-year history of how America basically invented the dope fiend. That when heroin first was created, it's not a naturally occurring substance. It's derived from opium. It's diacetylmorphine. So you go from opium to morphine, and from morphine to diacetylmorphine, and that's heroin. So it was developed by Bayer, the company that gave us aspirin. And there was a time when the aspirin and heroin were both developed and marketed within a year or two of each other. But the Bayer company was concerned that aspirin was bad for people's hearts, so they kept it on the shelf for 2 or 3 years while they were selling 100% pharmaceutical-grade heroin through the Sears catalog. Literally, you could buy pure heroin through the Sears catalog,
Wow.
and they were selling it as a cough suppressant. And it does work, apparently. Apparently, it's a very effective cough suppressant. It, of course, has other consequences. So this is a German company, EG Farben, which Bayer became a part of. So this big cartel that was a chemical company, and they saw a market for new painkillers, and somebody had already stumbled on the formula to create diacetylmorphine, and they figured out how to market it as a commercial product. The word heroin, the name heroin, comes from heroic. The idea being that they claimed that when a person used heroin, it made him feel like a hero. That's one explanation. There's a few other explanations where the name comes from, but that's fairly plausible. So I start off the story with opiates in America, and certainly long before there was heroin in the U.S., America was awash in opiates. The Civil War was a morphine war. The American, both North and South, more North, soldiers came back addicted to morphine because it was used for everything. It's obviously a very effective painkiller. But also, during the Civil War, more people died of diarrhea and dysentery than died from gunshot wounds. So morphine was a good way to actually cure, or at least to shut down the digestive system so people wouldn't die of dehydration.
That's interesting. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It did save lives, no question. Morphine saved a lot of lives after the war, but sad to say, many of the soldiers came back with what they called the soldier's disease, meaning they were physically dependent on morphine.
Right.
But that eventually abated, and then the main users of opiates in America were middle-class women. Various products, commercial products would be laced with morphine or opiates. So we're talking about 1870s, 80s, 90s, up to about World War I. It was very possible, very popular to get a hold of strong opiates from your drugstore, from the Sears catalog, from traveling salesmen, etc. So I start there with the book, talking about the United States and its relationship to opiates, and then I describe the invention and the marketing of heroin as a cough suppressant by this German company. And then the rest of the book I trace how America has in effect invented the dope fiend, invented this image of the sallow, hollow-eyed junkie, and I'm not a medical professional. My field is not medical analysis. My field is more cultural analysis. What did our country do with this substance, and how did it shape the way we see various, in particular, ethnic groups, the Chinese and Black Americans being targeted as they are the dark-skinned others, etc. So that's the general overarching frame of the book.
That's interesting, because now it seems like they first started using the opiates to kind of keep the women down, keep them kind of compliant, and home, and and then they started using it to keep the minorities down and the revolutionaries down and the protest movers down. Did you find that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's I saw that heroin becomes forbidden to be used about 1914, and then by the 20s it's totally clamped down. And about that same time, we've got big battles, immigration battles and labor battles between some of the labor unions not wanting Chinese or Black people taking jobs. So in some ways, these opiates were used, or addicts or opiate users were kind of a stick to beat various ethnic groups or stick to beat various others, and so that the power structure, in a way, used heroin as a tool to keep certain groups in their place, so to speak.
Compliant.
Yeah, compliant. Yeah, good. That's a good word for it. Sure.
Yeah.
And there was one particular guy named Richmond Pearson Hobson who I spent some time digging on. He started off as a war hero. He was a hero in the Spanish-American War. Came home, good-looking guy, doing a lot of traveling and press in the flesh. And he became a politician, ran for office, and he got onto the anti-alcohol wagon. So he was very much involved in prohibition and promoting prohibition. And so, but when 1920 comes along and alcohol gets supposedly banned in the United States, he had to find a new market. He had to find a new enemy. So he immediately switched over and he created these various anti-narcotics groups. And he was very much a self-promoter, and he bragged that he was the second best paid speaker in America. And he gave the same speech over and over again, trying to create this image of the crazed heroin addict. And it was a good way to make money. He traveled for years, giving the same speech, making money as a public speaker.
Who was the number one speaker?
Who was it? Maybe Clarence. It might have been Clarence Darrow. I'm not sure, actually. I'd have to dig back into the book. I'm not sure. Yeah. So in those days when live performances of speakers would be a very lucrative market. So there's always you can trace the money in any of these stories, whether it's electric chairs, Mormons, or heroin. You trace the money, you often find out the real story. And in this case, go ahead.
It's kind of interesting because a little story that I had heard once was back in vaudeville days, if they didn't like the performance, they would go out and they would try to beat up the ticket taker and try and get their money back. And that's why they have them behind those bars in that cage,
Right.
And they've kept up that tradition even till today. When you go to a movie theater, even if it's in a nice place, it's inside of a casino, they're still behind that bulletproof glass. Mm-hmm. I guess there's still some traditions die hard.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah. So I spent some time on the heroin book, but I wrote an article called "Who Put the Coke in Coca-Cola?"
Okay.
And that was I was a speaker at the American Association of Forensic Scientists a few years back. Their big meeting was down in Atlanta. And they wanted someone from the Coca-Cola Company, which is headquartered in Atlanta, to speak about the coca in Coca-Cola. They contacted the Coca-Cola Company, and the company said, "No way, we're not talking to anybody about this. Forget it." They didn't even return their calls. So the person who was in charge of getting speakers for this conference contacted me, and she had read this article that I wrote. Said, "Would you come down and speak?" I said, "Sure." So I went down to Atlanta to speak, and so there I was with 1,000 or 2 coroners and forensic scientists, and I was there just to give the keynote speech, and it was the one funded speech. So it was an interesting experience to speak to a couple hundred people who had all this technical knowledge. Far more than I have, biochemical knowledge, but they didn't have the story about cocaine in Coca-Cola. So it was more me giving the historical background, and then rather than talking about the the nuts and bolts of the chemistry.
Well, there's still people who don't know that Coke was in Coca-Cola?
They're still in denial, yes. The Coca-Cola to this day, the company says that it's a nonsense syllable, that the word Coca, it's just a coincidence that hundreds of other products were being sold with Coca in it. It was like heroin. It was very, very available. And like heroin, there's an interesting racial component to it. Why the cocaine was actually removed. Early on, Coca-Cola, as pretty much everybody knows, did have cocaine in it, or coca in it. But it was sold in fairly nice upscale soda fountains where you'd go, you pay your nickel, and you'd sit in this kind of charming building, and you'd enjoy it. Once it got bottled and was being sold to poor people, then people started worrying. Poor people, in particular, black folks getting high on cocaine. We can't have this, and so again, we have this kind of strange racial, shadow lurking behind the story. And that is one of the main reasons why Coca-Cola decided to yank it, because they were getting so much pressure from people thinking that the Coca was getting into the wrong hands. If it's in the hands of the middle class, then it's fine. But other classes, they got very nervous. So another little sidebar and some of our American, not so well known American history.
Now, what do you think about the current day heroin? Because it seems to me like all the heroin now is coming through Afghanistan, right?
Yeah. I'm not an expert, and I don't pretend to. I don't actually know much about the current situation. I wrote a screenplay a year or two ago, and my partner had made some contact with Philip Seymour Hoffman, the actor who died last year.
Okay.
And he got the screenplay into Hoffman's hands, and we were trying to pitch the screenplay to him, and he gave some comments. And then a week later, he was dead from a heroin overdose. And I thought, man, it's like bad. This is bad luck. Our screenplay must have been so bad that he offed himself. Who knows? I don't know. But so my contact with current heroin is non-existent. I'm more focused on the past than I am in the present, to be honest.
So most of your book is focused on when heroin was legal.
Yeah.
All right.
And then and also the process of how it became illegal, and then the process of framing the heroin addict, changing the heroin addict from being this middle class, genteel middle class person to being the dark-skinned other. Starting all the way with the Puritans landing in America, seeing the American Indians and, of course, slaves, etc. This idea of that the dark-skinned other is always the enemy.
All right.
And if you take the long view of American history, you see that there's always a demonized substance, whether it's tobacco or alcohol, opiates, whatever it is. That America always needs a demonized substance,
I can remember seeing there's a picture on Facebook, you see it all the time, of cough syrup, and it has cannabis in it, it has heroin in it, or and then there was I think another ingredient, maybe alcohol,
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Now that had to be some incredibly powerful cocktail. Now
Yes. Yeah, I do. I have a chapter in the book. Actually, I just flipped open to. There was a great number of these over-the-counter or through the mail products, and they had an amazing concoction. Even we're back to Thomas Edison, my old pal. Even he put out a product he called Polyform that had opiates, it had chlorohydrate, alcohol. It would have knocked probably people on their butts. And there were even products that were they were used to promote temperance. They were actually trying to get you off of alcohol, but they were laced with 20% alcohol, plus opiates. And there was one, Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, 21% alcohol. even though the highly successful Miss Pinkham was a vocal supporter of temperance. So we had a lot of hypocrisy going on. There was some of these things now would make doctors' hair stand up on end if they knew what people were putting in their bodies in those days.
Incredible. Okay, we're talking to Thomas Metzger, the author of The Birth of Heroin and the Demonization of the Dope Fiend. Okay, and we're talking. You can find that book on my blog, The Opperman Report. What's the name of your blog, too, Thomas? I know it has a funny pronunciation and a spelling.
Yeah, Ziggurat Lounge, Ziggurat, Ziggurat Lounge. And there's mostly short pieces of mine. It's an ongoing. It's a place for where some of the shorter stuff can show up or be reprinted, things that had shown up earlier in other publications.
Yeah, right. I'm going to put a link to that on my blog, too, because it's impossible to pronounce or spell. What made you pick a name like that, man?
Oh, that goes way back. Ziggurat was is another word for a pyramid, and that goes back, 20, 30 years. That was just a word that I found fascinating when I was young.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a little publishing company back in the 80s called Ziggurat. So it just continued over these years.
Yeah, it's a whole thing then. Okay, we'll have a link to that on my blog, The Opperman Report, where you can link to all his books, Undercover Mormon, A Spy in the House of the Gods, The Birth of Heroin and the Demonization of the Dope Fiend, and Blood and Bolts, Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. Now, let's get some words from our sponsors here. Don't forget here, we're sponsored by good old audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. If you want to get a free audio book, you go to audible.com, audibletrial.com, Opperman Report. You go in there, you look around, and you could find out whatever you want there for a free audio book, okay? Pacific West Bamboo. I love her. Amanda, she's in the chat room right now. As a matter of fact, if you need a bamboo, get her in the chat room right now. You can get a hold of her right now. This woman is a bamboo expert, okay? Now, let's say you need to torture somebody, right? You want to put bamboo under their fingernails. Amanda can help you and teach you how to do that. 503-839-8126. Her Facebook page is Pacific West Bamboo. They're getting a new line of bamboo flooring, veneers, laminates, made from Guadawa bamboo, one of the world's strongest bamboos, grown and produced and manufactured in Central America, using only economically and environmentally friendly practices and standards. 503-839-8126. Their email is demrootz, DEMROOTZ, @oppermail.com. They can and do ship nationwide. She can advise you on construction projects. Amanda's a very experienced businesswoman in all kinds of construction projects and stuff like that. Get a hold of her if you're doing anything in this field. You can also support the Opperman Report with a PayPal donation, oppermanreport@gmail.com, or buy my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator. Go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Good old Mike Gray. Mike Gray's in the chat room right now, too. Check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D and 2D draftsman services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D models, renderings, and more. InfinityHomeplans.com. Hey, my daughter Victoria, she got a show, CJ Mars Radio at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Saturday afternoon. Then she's also on Shake and Wake on Sundays. Now, let me tell you something. She's working on some big stuff. First of all, she's going to be interviewing Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo. We're going to hear all about her life. Behind the scenes, behind the curtain, the bamboo curtain. We're going to hear into a glimpse into Amanda's life. But Amanda has a really interesting life. You can hear a lot of stuff about that. She also has coming up, she's doing a big show about Taylor Swift. Victoria's involved in the whole Taylor Swift album launching. She's in touch with Taylor Swift's management. It's a big deal. Check it out. It's going to be a big show coming up. And good old Victoria Maria Opperman, teentruth.com. Emailrevealer.com. That's the home of the online infidelity investigation. You give me somebody's email address, I trace it back to online dating websites, I trace it back to online personal ads, social networks, and you can catch your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend cheating online. Then we got here the New World Mexican Women. I love these women. They're down in this town in Mexico there, the small village women in Mexico. They run a collective, an artist collective. They've written this book with love letters to their men who've come to America to find work and send money back to them down there. But they want their husbands and their fathers and their brothers and their uncles, they want them to come back to them, to this town here in Mexico. So they've written this beautiful book of their love letters. You can read them first in Spanish, in handwritten Spanish. Then they translate it into typewritten English. Also, they teach you how to make authentic Mexican jewelry. You can contact them for wholesale deals on authentic Mexican jewelry. You can make a ton of money ordering handmade authentic Mexican jewelry and selling it here in the United States, guys. You can set up a website or whatever and make a fortune and help support these women who help support this show. Okay, and the letters are beautiful. You can just Google New World Mexican Women. The book's only $19. You can download a free digital version and get a look at it, and then buy a book. Save up your $19, okay, and help out these women. Buy the book. You put it on your coffee table. It's a beautiful book. Now, good old Tammy. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils independent distributor. Now, these 100% therapeutic grade oils help support the body's natural functions. You can click on her website, posted on Essentially Tammy, to see the current deals and check out the benefits of oils such as frankincense. We all know that. We've heard of that, right? The story of Jesus, frankincense. We just had the Book of Mormon guy in here. Joy, valor, lemon, thieves, Panaway, and many more. Email jocatami @yahoo or call 352-239-8546. That's 352-239-8546. And once again, we are here with Thomas Metzger, author of all these fascinating books, Undercover Mormon, A Spy in the House of the Gods, The Birth of Heroin and the Demonization of the Dope Fiend, and of course, Blood and Volts, Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. Now, Thomas, did you ever get confused? Let's say you were at the Mormon temple and you start talking about heroin, or did that ever happen to you, man? No.
No, I tend to work on one project at a time.
I got you to laugh, though, man. All right.
Yeah, no, that was not a problem. Though some of my projects do overlap. For instance, my current project, I've been researching for 4 years. Actually, I wrote the Mormon book in the middle of this project. It's a biography of a Roman Catholic priest who was also an abortionist.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was convicted of performing abortions. He boxed with the heavyweight champion of the world. He practiced medicine and law without a license. He was an amazing guy. And so I've been working on him for 4 years, and I'm about 60,000 words into a new book. That's a couple hundred pages. I think it's going to be a big book, physically big book. Hopefully it'll sell some copies and be big that way too. But my point is that I'm always working on something. So in the middle of this researching this book about the abortionist priest, I did the 6-month stint as a Mormon, and so I put one project away for the time being.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I've always got projects brewing, and some of them require many years of research. So I might be working on another book at the same time. But I never slipped and started talking about the chair with the Mormons.
Okay. But wait, you did slip though, and you told me about this abortionist priest. Okay, now where was this guy located?
He's again upstate New York. I guess I'm a regionalist. Almost everything I write about is within striking distance of where I live. So he lived about 40 miles from here. Small town. He got involved in he ended up in prison for performing abortions, and to this day he's highly execrated. People literally spit. Some people spit when they hear his name, but he died 75 years ago. So it's a while in the past. I've met a few people who actually knew him, spoken to some old people. So he's kind of a local legend, but it's sort of not exactly a dirty legend, but a legend that some people think of him as being a villain. Some people think of him as being a hero, though. He was a supporter of the Italian. There's big salt mines up here, and he was big promoter of the Italian salt miners, defending them at gunpoint.
Really?
The sheriff trying to, strike breaking. The sheriff's trying to break the strike. So the priest was facing him down. Black labor unions too. He was a supporter of. He bragged that he was the best obstetrician in the area. He birthed a lot of babies too. So it's a very interesting combination of arrogance and power, and he was a dedicated Roman Catholic priest. Although he was the word defrocked is actually not accurate, but he was taken. It's called being removed of your faculties. In other words, he got kicked out. But he, because he was such a tough guy, he basically said, if you want to defrock me, come over here and do it yourself. Because he was a boxer too, and he didn't take guff from anybody. So he functioned. He lived his whole life in this small town. When he spent a few years in prison, but he came back to the small town, started his life again, and lived well into his 80s. So I'm working on a book about this guy too currently. And oddly enough, he overlaps with the electric chair book. I was working on that book now 20 years ago. This priest was in Auburn State Prison at the moment when the big riot happened that burned up the original electric chair. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so some of the projects I work on, they sort of loop around. Edison shows up in the electric chair book. There's a lot about him there, but he's in the heroin book because he produced this opiate patent medicine. So it's interesting to see these lines or these kind of threads that go out throughout history, and keep the same names, the same figures keep showing up
right
over and over again.
Now, what is the name of this priest?
I'm actually not going to say that until the book's done. Yeah, I'm holding on to this guy.
What about who was the champ that he boxed?
John L. Sullivan.
Okay, wow. Okay.
I can tell you about this, and this is a fascinating. There's a place called the Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame, which is on the New York-Pennsylvania state line. So basically in the middle of nowhere, and it's a little town where. There was a man named William Muldoon who was America's first celebrity bodybuilder. Big, built like a tank, beautiful mustache, big head of hair, dressed beautifully, Dapper Dan kind of guy. So he was this celebrity fitness guy. And John L. Sullivan was the heavyweight champion of the world, but he was a chronic alcoholic, drank himself he was grossly overweight. He was so badly debilitated by alcohol that he was actually on crutches. But at that moment, somebody challenged him, and he accepted the challenge from Jake Kilrain. So the backers said, well, what are we going to do? We got to take. He's accepted this match, but he's a cripple. He can barely move. So this guy Muldoon said, give him to me for 2 months. I'll ship him up to my little farm up here in Western New York. Give me 2 months. I will train him. If he wins the match, I get $10,000. And this is back in the 1880s. So
wow.
That's the equivalent. That's 100, 200 grand. If he wins, I get 10 grand. If he loses, I don't get a penny. So they said, well, what do we got to lose? So they shipped him up to this little town, and they started training him. And after 2 months, he'd lost 80 pounds or so. He was running 20 miles a day in sweats. He was in shape, and they sent him on a train. And at this time, bare knuckle or boxing in general was illegal, but certainly bare knuckle was. They put him on a train. They didn't even know where the fight was going to take place because they had to find a place where they could get away with it without the authorities shutting them down. So put him on a train, and he goes to Chicago and then goes down along the Mississippi. He ends up in the state of Mississippi where the match is going to take place. And he meets Jake Kilrain there, and they fought 75 rounds, bare knuckles, in 104-degree temperature outside. And he won. This guy who was on crutches a couple months before, he went 75 rounds bare knuckles. So William Muldoon got his $10,000, and he went on to write books about fitness and bodybuilding, etc. So anyway, there's the building where this guy was trained has been shut up for decades, locked up and kind of forgotten about. And there's a guy in this small town of Belfast, New York, bought the building, moved it a short distance, opened it up as the Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame. And now boxers come there. Leon Spinks was there for a week. Various people come there to train. And it's this amazing glimpse into the late 19th century because everything was untouched. There's boxing gloves,
Oh my God, yeah.
the speed bags, the big heavy bags, all the weightlifting. Everything was just as it was left. And you go there, you pay a couple bucks, and you get to at this little museum, and you can do all the the owner said, go ahead, hit the bags, use the Indian clubs, lift the weights, whatever. This is a guy's museum, and it's a hands-on museum. It's anything you want to do, you can touch everything here. So my point is that this boxer, John L. Sullivan, trained for a couple of months there. And he was still drinking, so they would lock him in at night. And there's a room in this museum with iron bars on all the way around, and the bars are twisted like spaghetti. This Sullivan would try to break out at night, and there were leg chains. They'd chain him up at night.
Get out of here.
I saw the chains. They'd chain him up. He would break sometimes, get loose, and go into these other small towns. One of the times he did it, he met the subject of this research, this priest, and he challenged this guy to a fight. And so they had this fight, this heavyweight champion of the world boxing with a priest. Both of them, one of them escaping from his captor, and one of them definitely breaking the rules by boxing. So anyway, that's just one little corner of the biography of I'm working on, or the story of this priest that I'm working on.
That's
very, very fascinating.
Do you have pictures of the gym in there too?
The book's not out yet. I'm still working on it.
Yeah, are you gonna? Yeah, you should put pictures.
Yeah.
In there.
If you look for Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame, you can find pictures. It's and I was there about a month ago or so, and getting all the info. And out in front of the Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame are two life-size statues, one of Sullivan and one of Muldoon, the trainer, and they're carved out of marble, and quite well done. And I said, where in the world did you get two statues of these guys? And he said, these were carved by 10 Vietnamese Buddhist monks. I said, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, I found them online. I paid $10,000. I sent them the specs and the photos. They carved these statues, and they crated them up and sent them to America. And there they stand in the middle of this little town, kind of in the middle of nowhere, two proud boxers with their dukes up.
That's incredible too, man. That's a whole story in itself. Yeah, what do you?
It is exactly. Yeah. So, that's the kind of thing that keeps me going. When I find a new story or new little corner that hasn't been investigated, that gets me out of bed in the morning.
I hear you, man. Yeah. Now with this priest though, now how did he find? Because he was what do you call it? It was an obstetrician giving birth, obstetrician, right? Yeah. So he was delivering babies first. He was
delivering babies first. Yeah, one of his. Yeah, he trained one of the members of his congregation when he lived in Rochester, where I live. One of the members of his congregation was a doctor, and as far as I can tell, he trained with him and was birthing babies probably secretly for years. And then it all hit the fan.
Wait a second, so he was delivering the babies.
He was delivering babies.
In secret.
And then later on, he was performing abortions. So he was doing both.
Why did he have to deliver them in secret?
Because he had no medical degree, and it was illegal. He was a Roman Catholic priest, and he would have gotten in major trouble with his bishop. So he was the kind of guy that if somebody said anybody can do this, he would do it. Meaning he was bright, he was motivated, and if he thought it was worth doing, then by God, he would do it. And eventually he got defrocked or removed of his faculties, as they call it. And the sheriff that was one of his main enemies in this small town, there's a famous, one of the most important moments in this story. On Christmas Eve, full packed house, Christmas Eve in a Roman Catholic church, the sheriff standing at one end of the aisle with a drawn gun pointing at the priest who's standing at the altar saying Mass, and the sheriff saying, if you don't stand down, there will be bodies to be buried tomorrow morning. And so we have this sort of Wild West showdown in a Catholic church on Christmas night. So this priest.
Wait a second. Wait a second. Wait. The showdown was over him saying Mass?
No, the showdown was over the fact that he had been removed of his faculty. He'd been kicked out, but he refused to stand down.
Yeah.
So he was still running the church, and nobody was going to tell him to. If anybody told him to move, he said no. He basically, come and make me. So eventually, he had made a lot of enemies. So the sheriff was already an enemy. But I love this image of a standing with all the candles burning and the choir and et cetera. And here's this, and the sheriff was 6'6". So you got this giant holding a pistol, aiming at a priest. This is the late 1800s. So, it's sort of a strange Wild West episode, although not in the West, but here out here in the East. When life was still pretty rough out in the country.
Man, they were probably on heroin and coke too at the same time.
Oh no, yeah. Well,
yeah?
As far as I know, I think he was clean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's an incredible. That's going to be. No, do you have a title for that book?
I don't. I'm still working on it. I don't have a title for it, but it'll.
What can you call it? The priest who does the abortions and fights Sullivan. What can you call it?
I don't know. I was thinking something along the lines of boxer, lawyer, abortionist, priest. I don't know.
I don't know either,
Baker,
man.
Yeah, it's not done yet, so the title will come. It'll be there. So that's my current project.
Oh no, that's excellent, man. Yeah, and when you're done with that, give me a call. We'll bring it back on, and we can add it to the blog in a minute. That's no problem at all.
That'd be fun.
Oh my God.
Good idea.
Yeah, I love that story.
Mm.
Now, but you're telling me that back in those days. What about the separation of church and state? Like,
Well, yeah, this was a small town where there was.
They didn't have a copy of the Constitution.
Yeah, we could put it. Yeah, we could put it that way. It was big, money talks, and there was a lot of big money. Well, there was a family that basically ran the whole area, and the sheriff was basically the goon squad.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of dirty politics. Well, what politics aren't dirty? There was a lot of politics, and it got dirty. And these two guys were on two different sides of this political battle. Republicans, Democrats, it's the same story, 100 years later. Dirty politics.
Yeah, that's so true. Nothing really changes, man. Nothing changes. Yeah. Everything stays the same. Okay, well, we're getting toward the end of the show, man.
We are.
Yeah, man. I can't thank you enough.
Well, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. And I can't thank a good old Gary Roscoe Johnson, man. Hey, do you know where his tattoo place is?
I have never been to Detroit. I only know him through the mail and through the phone and through the internet.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, he used to be up in Toronto. I saw him a couple of times in Toronto, but it's been a long time. So, yeah, Roscoe, if you're listening, greetings. Thank you for putting me together here with Ed.
Yeah, definitely. He promised me, he said he had a good guest who could talk all night, and I said, okay, great, send him to me. Gary Roscoe Johnson, look for him, go to his Facebook page, or you could find him. He's supposed to be like a tattoo artist, like a real genius over there, man, in Westland, Michigan, which is like near Detroit. So anything you want to leave us with? Any kind of plugs or something you want to give before we go?
No, I think I think we should plug Roscoe again. Yeah, Dr. Roscoe Tattoo and Piercing at Johnson Tattoo.
That's what it is. Yeah, Piercer at Johnson Tattoo Studio. Yeah.
Yes, and he comes from a long line. I think his father and maybe even his grandfather were also in the business. So he comes by it honestly. He does old school, new school, and so anyway, Roscoe, if you're listening, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Okay, so we had good old Thomas Metzger, not the Thomas Metzger, the other one. The good one, the cool guy.
The good one.
Yeah, the good one, man. I could just imagine, man, growing up with
I have gotten some hate mail for him.
Yeah, I can imagine.
People have gotten us confused, but there's a German physicist with our name, too. That poor guy, you go online and you look for T.H. Metzger and you look for my stuff, and interfiled with my stuff about heroin and Mormons, there's these high-end German physics articles. So in some ways, he gets the raw version than I do.
Well, a lot of people, they call me Oppenheimer, the guy from the atom bomb. That's all I need to. But if you want to get the good old Thomas Metzger, the nice one, you want to get his books, The Birth of Heroin and the Demonization of the Dope Fiend, Undercover Mormon, A Spy in the House of the Gods, Blood and Volts, Edison, Tesla, and the Invention of the Electric Chair. You can go to my blog, The Opperman Report, and you can find all the links there. As soon as, I'll tell you for a fact, as soon as this other book comes up, we're going to add that on there for sure, man. That's fascinating, because I grew up when I was a kid, coming home from grammar school, Catholic school, by the way. Maybe I knew that priest. Maybe he beat me up.
Yeah. I don't think you overlap.
No, I don't think so either. I was in the Bronx, but I used to stop off at an old-fashioned boxing gym myself every day on the way home from school. At 12 years old, man. I'm in there with grown men, I'm 53, and back in those days, there was no kind of parental release. You had to sign. Right. You just kind of did whatever you want. But I can't thank you enough, Thomas, man. And
my pleasure.
God bless you, brother.
We'll talk again.
Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, so next week, we got a really, really big show coming up next week with a good old Reverend Edward Pinkney, okay? And this is a real deal. This guy's a real revolutionary activist fighting for you, fighting for me. It's no joke. They're trying to railroad this guy. They're trying to give him 20 years in prison for some nonsense about voter fraud, okay? So now, as soon as we heard this story, we heard this through our friends over there, the New World Mexican Women. We got a hold of the Reverend Pinkney because we want to support him. Okay, now the link to his blog is bhbanco.org, bhbanco.org, and there's a PayPal donation button on there. Okay, if you want to send him a check, it's Banco, B-A-N-C-O. That's a legal defense fund for Reverend Pinkney. 1940 Union Avenue, Benton Harbor, Michigan, 49022. Now, I'm going to let him tell you the story when he comes here next week of what's been going on. But I can tell you this, that other guests of ours, first of all, these women down there in Mexico, they know this story, okay? Every one of us should know this story if these women down there in Mexico know this story, okay? This should be on the tip of all of our tongues. When one of us is being railroaded, and they're threatening to throw him in prison for 20 years because he runs for office, okay? It's a town, it's a company town there. We'll get into that. I'm going to let him tell it to you, okay? But we need to support guys like this because they're fighting for us. When they get in trouble, we need to fight for them. Now, we're going to take a little break, okay, in a couple of minutes. I'm going to rant a little bit more and rave a little bit more. At the end of the break, we're going to do an after show. I'm going to invite all my regular callers to call in. Anybody wants to call in, fine. You can Skype me at ed.opperman. You can Skype me and get on live. We can talk about stuff. Or you can call in. Let's see what the number is. I always forget what it is. It's 702-605-4894. Okay? You can call in. You can ask questions. You can call in and have comments. I'm going to read a statement. Okay? Everybody's kind of read it by now, but I'm going to read the statement anyway because I want it on the record of why we left freedomslips.com, why we left Revolution Radio, and what our plans are for the future with this show, and the standards that we have, that we intend to maintain with this show, and what we're doing here, and how you can get involved. Because I'll tell you right now, we need volunteers. what we really need is an engineer, an audio engineer, okay, who can help us out, that can run the whole SAM broadcasting from a remote location, that has a big, powerful internet presence, with a bandwidth and all that kind of stuff, that I can just log into him and they take over for me. And I don't have to be all distracted with handling these phone calls and running SAM, because we can simulcast on about 20 different stations, okay, just as long as we have somebody to run this for us, because I'm not incapable of doing it. I'm not incapable of doing it, but it's a lot of distraction stuff going on here. And one thing I can't be distracted is getting 45 minutes of Skype messages, during a show. Like last week we had good old Daniel Sheehan, civil rights activist, guy who worked for Jimmy Carter, it was a Harvard Law Review, argued in front of the Supreme Court, okay? That's an important guest. That's the kind of guy that I want to be friends with off the air, okay? I'm trying to make connections here, guys, for all of us. And then we move forward and all this kind of stuff we're doing here, man. I don't need to be heckled during my show, okay? So we're coming to the end of the show. I want to thank Scott Hare, okay, from Hazy Radio, man. He filled in for Zeta tonight, and he's a cool guy, and he's helping us getting all this producing going on here. Cindy Jean-Pierre, man, I love you, Cindy. She's here every week for us. She produces my daughter's show as well. These two have given us a home here, where it's safe and peaceful and happy and all that kind of stuff. We're going to play out a little musical break, okay? Hazy Radio, they're going on to a different show, different programming here. Maybe you can send me a little note and I'll plug them. We're coming on Hazy next. They always have quality programming on there. Good old Cindy Jean-Pierre. We're going to be taking a little break, a little musical break. We're going to come back, take calls at ed.opperman. My usual callers can call in. I'm going to read a statement. I'm starting to ramble. You can call in at 702-605-4894. Maybe we'll just make prank phone call. You guys ready to go? Okay.